Hey everyone, and no, it's a super bummer that we can't be there in person for MomoCon this year, but we do have MomoCon online. And I am here to help with that. My name is Jamie Jones. I'm one of the co-owners of Infinite Realities Comics and Tucker. But more importantly, I am the director of comics programming here at MomoCon. And today I get to talk to some amazing people about coloring. We've got Laura Martin and Carrie Tupper.
Hi.
How is coloring a comic any different than me grabbing a coloring book and some, like colored pencils and crayons?
First,
Right.
you can color outside the lines if you want.
Ooh, nice. You don't have to follow the rules. Oh yeah. I think the big thing is that there's storytelling involved. As a colorist, you are enhancing the storyline that's appearing in the page, and that all takes a good balance of understanding color theory and what color can do emotionally to the reader. So you bring a lot of that to the work, but you can certainly do that in with crayons and coloring books too if you want. It's just a different thought pattern a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And there's so much thought that you have to put into color as far as like, okay, at least so I'm also a writer and I'm also a storyteller. And one of the things that I do when I pick out color, it's very purposeful. It's
Yeah.
not just, oh,
Sorry, Frank is going to be there. There will be a parade of cats.
sorry.
I'll have to pardon me.
I just got like left field.
Sorry.
Great color. Okay. So yeah, it is a storytelling medium in of itself, and you have to often think about like how is color represented and brought into like how do people understand color culturally?
Right.
Because it's not just oh well east and west, it's also north hemisphere, south hemisphere as well, and it depends on who your audience is or
Mhm.
who you're trying to educate as to why those colors mean that thing. Everybody knows that Darth Vader has one look, or Luke Skywalker has another.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you also have to think of it. It has to be more than just that binary thing.
Mhm.
There are shades of gray. Some colors have multiple meanings. Like you can have yellow. You
Mhm.
show somebody yellow and you put it on a superhero suit, and somebody says, "Oh, it's yellow," and another person will say it's gold. And it's sort
Right.
of, what does that mean? If it's gold, it's royal and all that kind of stuff. If it's yellow, that can actually mean that they're cowardly. So it just depends on. I also very deeply look into the symbolism and understanding of how people see culturally see color.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big point to make. And again, it all comes back to the storyline. I am strictly a colorist. I don't write. I don't draw sequentially or anything. So my entire understanding of storytelling is in color. So not only are you servicing, what you want your reader to understand culturally, but also what you want to invoke emotionally as well. So, it requires an awful lot of understanding of the material, the script, the reading the artwork, really understanding what the artwork is trying to tell you, where the important parts are on the page, how you highlight those things, how you draw the reader's eye across the page, and how you invoke a certain atmosphere or even an emotion from the page itself or from the scene that's going on.
Yeah.
So, I'm myself, I tend to lean toward heavily primary colors. I like strong colors. I like punching contrary colors because they're mean, contrasting colors together. That's very exciting for me. But I also truly adore the subtler work of like European artists and stuff who uh, can evoke so much of an atmosphere with so much less hue or actual pigmentation, as it were. So yeah, I mean, we bring all of this to the page when we're coloring comics, and each comic can be a completely different look. I mean, when I was on Wonder Woman, that was a completely different look than when I was on Black Panther. It was two entirely different stories set in two entirely different worlds with two entirely different artists. So I took different approaches to both, and switching back and forth from one project to the other took a little bit of time and work because you're like, oh, I'm in Black Panther world. It's all very, very graphic and sharp and pointy and energetic. And then you go to Wonder Woman, which was there was a lot of jungle scenery. There was a lot of, a lot of painterly sort of stuff going on in there. So the colorist has to consider all of that too. Has to bring all that to the work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, correct.
What resources would you recommend if someone wanted to study color theory? I mean, because it sounds really cool.
Color and Light by George Gurney. He's the
Yeah.
guy who did Dinotopia.
Yeah.
I think his name is George Gurney. Where's
Mhm.
my head? Anyway, look up the guy who did Dinotopia. He did a great book called Color and Light.
Nice.
And it's filled with dinosaurs and color and you can't go wrong. It's a really, really good book. As far as like actual further color theory, like there's like if you just want something really easy and accessible, there's so much on YouTube. Like
Oh
just
yeah.
so much on YouTube. Just
Mhm.
go to YouTube, look up color theory, and you'll find thousands of ways that people use it. Because I come from a background of storytelling, and also like my first foray into everything was screenwriting, so I studied film for a long time. And for me, being a colorist, studying film is really helpful,
Mhm.
especially when you see how film uses color, because you can basically say, hey, I can use apply those same ideas to my comic as well. And
Mhm.
I love looking at the color comps for that you see in like the Disney art of books. So it's like
Yes.
the story
Yes.
point, and like
Oh
here's
my
the
God.
colors, and they're
Those
just so
are great.
wonderful because they're using color and light in a way that that evokes storytelling. Actually, a really good one to check out is if you're interested in color theory, is um, come on, what is it? Prince of Egypt. If you have the chance to look it up,
Mhm.
if you haven't watched Prince of Egypt, I want you to watch Prince of Egypt, and I want you to notice two things: the color blue and the color red. And
Mhm.
you'll see actually the color of red and blue constantly at odds. And
Mhm.
things like, for example, when you see Moses uh, in Egypt, and his place is like the Prince of Egypt, he's like got this, he's always bathed in this warm light, and he's always got red on, and it sort of symbolizes his home. But when he sees Miriam for the
Mhm.
first time and she's singing that song, uh, her she is a single entity that is colored in sort of drab reds, and she's bathed in this warm glow light, and he is lost in a sea of blue, which actually represents Ramses.
Mhm.
So that's just a really, really good take on how you can use storytelling, because with those red tones, that warm glow, that's what's supposed to be home for
Mhm.
Moses at
Mhm.
that time. And like just seeing the thought that went into that, just like, oh my
Yeah.
God. That movie is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like M. Night Shyamalan using color in the movie
Mhm.
Signs with a character, and James Cameron, everything's just blue.
Oh God, yes. Yep.
Good Lord. So many blue filters.
Oh, yeah.
Do you do you read the whole script, or do you get the whole story?
I always get the script, or if I don't get the script right off the bat, I ask for it because there's so much information, or there hopefully is so much information there that may not be on the page, that may not be immediately available in the black and white version that I'm looking at. For instance, if there are any special effects that are needed, the script says, "Hey, in this scene, the Fantastic Four are invisible," and it may not be drawn that way, and I may not know that if I didn't have the script in front of me. So yeah, I do try to read through. I try to. No, I do. I read through the script and just double check if there's anything particularly that any questions that are not answered, like so for instance, time of day. Let's say there's an establishing shot of the city and there's a circle in the sky. Could be a moon, could be a sun. Don't know. Maybe not. If the art is very open and doesn't have a lot of blacks, it could go either way. You don't know. So um, little things like that I like to check out. Also, I do, like I said earlier, I read the art. I really study what's going on in the like in the lighting and shadows that are in the inks or in the pencils, and really sort of um, just try to build a palette based on each scene. So each scene is visually different from the previous one. So when there's a scene change or a location change. Um, Sometimes I have to go back and fix things when I do it that way because sometimes I work out of order. But that's yeah, that's where I start with the script all the time as often as I can. And if there's something that I need reference for, that's the big thing. Is I usually ask for, like, hey, I don't really know which costume this person is in now, so can you send me the most recent version of whoever, or gee, I haven't seen this iteration of this villain in forever. Can you please let me know what colors they're wearing at this point in time? Stuff like that. So uh, yeah, and I always try to keep an open line of communication, especially, well, obviously with my editors, but also with my penciler, my writer, and my inker, as as I can, as much as possible, because I like to be able to collaborate and make sure that I'm literally on the same page that they are. So.
Do your pages come to you already inked? Like, is that the process that when they come to you, they're at that point?
Yeah, unless the artist is working in pencils, yeah. But most of the time, I'm working over inks, so I get the scan of the ink to artwork. Actually, a lot of times I get it directly from the inker, but it'll go through editorial first just to make sure there's any changes on that end. But a lot of times the inker will just send me the page when they're done with it, and I'll upload it to Marvel as well, or to DC or whoever. So that's kind of it really depends at that point on the timing. If I'm waiting for pages at near the end of the deadline, then they'll just send me pages. Whoever has the page, send it to me now. But usually I get from the publishers, FTP or wherever it happens to be. So yeah.
Do you use a flatter?
Mm-hmm. Do you have a flatter, Carrie? Have you worked with flatters, Carrie? I'm sorry. Do you work with flatters?
I don't.
Okay.
I actually do everything myself. So, and I actually, I have to admit, because I do everything myself, like flatting for me, I've learned is a very different aspect of like I do it very differently.
Oh,
Like
okay.
it's like I almost kind of just sort of skip over that and then just start filling and
Uh,
coloring. It's probably a lot easier if I just did it like the traditional flatting way, but I'm impatient.
yeah.
So
Although, however, the fun thing is everybody works a little bit differently. So I tend to fall asleep when I'm flatting, and that's bad. So
yeah.
I I find it incredibly boring. And although I do. Sometimes it's fun, but no, I really would rather have somebody else do it for me. So yeah, I'll take the pages. I'll make sure they're if there's any cleanup needed on, like, borders or anything like that, I'll do that. I'll send the pages over to my flatters. And I want to shout out to Chelsea Shudo and to Chris Garcia, who are amazing, and Holly Garcia, who are amazing flatters, and they save my butts all the time, and I love them to death. And Hank Jones, thank you all so much for that. I love you all. And they essentially they fill in the colors in each of the shapes on the page, and whatever colors they choose has no bearing or no relevance to what I'm going to do. I know some people like their flatters to flat in grayscale, or they'll actually send them a palette and say flat in these colors. It all depends on how you want to work. I would rather not be influenced by my flatters choices, so I just let them flatten whatever colors they want. If they want to make Superman pink and green, go for it. I'm good with that. And then I'll go through and I'll take the entire page of the flats, and I'll bucket in, which means I'll just choose the color I want and change the flats to the colors I want over the entire page, or even the entire scene. And then from there, I'll start rendering, doing the highlights and shadows and rendering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carrie, what is your process, Carrie?
Okay, so Kamikaze, the project I work on, and any of my other projects, I'm very like I come from a background of animation. So we actually take that animated style and try to stick to it with the Kamikaze. Um, and so our whole idea is that we want you to read the comic but feel like you're reading a movie.
Cool.
And it's sort of like a love letter to both comics and animation at the same time.
Nice.
And the way we actually do it is by following the animation pipeline. So we have ink and paint department, which is basically me. We have roughs, we have cleans. And then once everything goes from the roughs and cleans, I get the inks, and then I also do the actual color portion. And like Laura was saying, you kind of do the bucket fill, but then from there, I'm also like really focusing in on the shading to make the cell shading, because we use cell shading, like really pop, and trying to make it just look as badass as possible. So there's points like ultimately, like within the inks, because I'm inking them, like we don't use really hard blacks. We use that, very thin lined animated work. A lot of people look at our stuff and says, this looks great, but why don't you use more hard blacks? And I'm like, because I don't want to. That kind of takes away from the animated appeal. But
It's a different
yeah,
look. Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different aesthetic. So yeah.
yeah, it is. It's a very different aesthetic. Aesthetic. There it is. Um, but yeah, so from there, I play with overlays or different types of layers, and try to make it look as you know because the backgrounds are actually done differently, like they're done separately from the actual character design
Huh.
or character art. So my husband's doing all of the background art, coloring all of that. And one of the things I have to be kind of mindful of is like, okay, where's my light source coming from in this scene? Because that is all on me.
Wow.
Um, and it's one of the things in doing traditional and actually coloring a couple other projects for people has been sort of a very frustrating point, because I'll have like get the inks in, and then like if you look at the light source, it's coming from one direction, but there's like a lamp or something behind them that is really brightly lit, and it's just like,
Mhm.
I can't fix this.
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
can't fix this. I don't know how to fix
And
this.
how do you handle a situation like that when you've got just something you just can't work with?
Usually I talk to the editor and say, hey, this is a problem. I try not to go over people's heads too much. Like I usually don't want to do that, but there's been some inkers that are just like, well, that's how it is, and all that sort of stuff. And it takes like, I don't know. I've worked with some pretty um, new inkers who have done things like, you've got people that don't have shoes, or um, like you've got crowd shots from overhead and nobody has shoes. There's no feet. There's points where you have like lines aren't really well defined, so you're not sure what you need to color and what you need not don't need to color.
Mhm.
So yeah, that can be a little bit of a frustration point. But anyway, ultimately, once I get into the shading portion, I really also try to figure out, okay, where is my highlights coming from, if there are any highlights.
Mhm.
And then I'm very careful about how I use the color pure black and pure white, because I try to keep those as minimal as possible, because otherwise you kind of, I don't know, it kind of like the colors kind of get lost if you're using too pure a black or a white.
Yeah. Yeah. Since most of my work is inked and often heavily inked, that's one color I don't have to worry about. It's already on the page.
Yeah.
My concern is choosing colors that aren't too dark that they blend into the black,
Yes.
or that or that I'm also reading the light sources properly. I can't tell you how many times I have had, you know, a 3 or 4 page scene, and the first page has a beautifully set up light source, and it all makes sense. The pages, you know, the scene is laid out exactly so, and I light the thing, and then, you know, and then I'm stuck with that lighting for the next 3 pages when it doesn't read right because there's no backgrounds or there's something going on in there that suddenly I'm like, how, this was, I established this earlier, but now I can't follow through and I have to sort of fake it.
Yeah.
And I fake it as much as I can, you know, it's ultimately, I remind myself, oh wait, there's also going to be word balloons all over this. So you know, some of this is going to be covered up and I don't have to worry about it too much. I'll just make sure the characters can be seen well and are generally lit as if they're in the same room. You know, yeah, word balloons in there, just many word balloons all, yeah, good.
That was really wordy.
Yeah. Bendis wrote it. Housing.
So you've worked on everything from like Ragnarok with Walt Simonson, X-Men, and are you currently doing Thor?
No, I am doing the covers with Olivier, but not the interiors. Yeah, yeah. I think they just finally announced the thing that I am working on, which I have not been able to talk about for a long time, which is Fantastic Four Antithesis, which is Mark Waid is writing it and Neil Adams is drawing it. So I'm working on Neil Adams right now. Yeah, so that's super exciting, and I'm nervous because I mean, talk about high profile, but yeah, it's I haven't worked with the FF a whole lot. Oh no, I just take that back. I just did the X-Men FF thing, didn't I? Yeah, so this is it's kind of fun because I know that Neil Adams is really, he loves the, you know, the Kirby Buscema run, and that's his inspiration. So, you know, I'm kind of working with that in mind on this one, on the coloring. So
Now that's awesome. Is there anyone that you like want to work with that you kind of keeping an eye on?
yeah, it seems, yeah. I mean, but there's still there's so many artists out there, especially the new artists who are coming up who are just amazing. And you know, I get excited when I get to work with people whose work I don't know that much, because then I get to say, oh wow, here's another artist I get to discover and learn things from, and pick their brain about where they've come from and how, you know, they've come up through comics. And a lot of people now are coming up through, you know, digital work as opposed to print comics. So it's a, you know, it's a, and they're working digitally, and it's a different sort of a different approach and a different line style. Um, they want, and you know, they're coming from more, say, like a video game, you know, inspiration, or you know, an anime or manga inspiration, and those are, um, you know, that's the younger generation coming up and working now. And I say that realizing that, yes, I have been in comics for a generation, for 20 something years now. So, oh God. Well, I started in 1995, so there you go.
But you've worked with like everyone, like Wildstorm,
Yeah.
CrossGen, Marvel. I mean, everyone.
Mhm.
Is all your work digital?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
We actually, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say that. So you don't have like original line art that's scanned in or anything. You just, it's all completely digital.
We started out that way, and then we realized we had Cintiqs. Um, so we were like, why are we doing this?
Mm.
Um, but we are definitely most entirely digital now. Everything is done that way. We do have some originals left, but for us, it's just, it makes, like, we don't have to buy the paper, which is really expensive.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
like if we mess up on the ink, or like God forbid you spill coffee on something, like it's just
On it or whatever. Yeah. Oh yeah.
it's just like, let me call up my artist and ask them to do it again.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just doesn't work that way. So um doing completely digital, yeah, that's how we are right now. We're trying to make the switch over from Photoshop to um Clip Studio.
Yeah.
But I'm still learning Clip Studio, so
Yeah.
What
I know,
programs are you using more?
sorry, Frank's gonna walk into the shot again. Frank, really, uh,
Fluffy.
he's my old man.
What program?
It's true. Frank, God, all right, come here. So yeah, I've been a Photoshop girl for, since day one. But one of my office mate, actually, Brian Stelfreeze, he is a total convert to Clip Studio, and he's been working with it since it was Manga Studio, back when we'd have to actually interpret the Japanese version of all of the menu bars and everything. So I mean, he is diehard into Clip Studio, and I am working my way around it. I use it on the iPad, but not on my regular machine. So um, I'm still pretty new to it, but it is an amazing tool and incredibly helpful for colorists and artists in general. So much more so than Photoshop. I can say that even as somebody who's been in Adobe products all since college. I mean, all of my entire working life. So
Mhm.
it's just, yeah, Photoshop needs to up their game or something. I don't know. Or just be cheaper, maybe.
That's subscription now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And since Randy, my husband, is a designer, we decided to go ahead and get the whole like suite. So we're paying like $80 a month, and it's yes, it's a tax write off, but still, it's
80 bucks a month. That's like a power bill.
yeah, exactly. It really is. It really is. So, but yeah, in Clip Studio, it's like what, 25 or something for like yeah, it's not even a subscription. You buy the software. So
Yeah, and they have sales all the time.
yeah.
So like I have gotten it for $25.
Mhm.
So I think it originally sells for like maybe 50,
Yeah,
but
something like that. Yeah. Oh yeah.
oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Anybody who wants to start out and just try coloring, yeah, definitely look into Clip Studio. There's some other, Procreate is another one that's really good for art, for just creating art on iPad surfaces or whatever. But I don't know how it works for coloring comics specifically. Um, just for, especially if you're doing any sort of pre-press stuff, if you're actually going to press on stuff. That's one drawback the Clip Studio also has, is that it doesn't have a functioning CMYK option that would be specifically for sending to print, and that's where Photoshop shines. So
Have you ever run into a situation where the colors just don't translate?
Oh yes. Oh yes, we did. So we found this really nifty little tool called Color Monkey, which is color MUNKI,
okay.
which has really helped us figure out like what the CMYK would look like, what the colors are going to look like based on the printer. I like how Laura's writing that down. It has been a lifesaver. Um, because we had some serious issues because we are also a webcomic. We print as a webcomic first.
Mhm.
Uh, we have to have both RGB and CMYK. So we have to convert the RGB once everything's done into a CMYK, which can be really, really weird. Our
Yeah.
main character is biracial. She has a very brown skin, and so there's points where for one of our proofs we got back and she was orange, and I was like, we can't
No.
do this. Like that's not okay. She can't be orange. So it's been a consistent learning curve for us, especially since like print is a whole separate art to me personally, because like you've got so like this, just getting everything ready for print is for me at least was really, really stressful.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. It's funny because I've always worked in RGB as well, but that is because back in my day, back in the late 19th, in the late 20th century, machines were really slow. God, yeah. I'm talking in the late 90s. Uh, Computers were slow, and working in RGB was one less channel than working in CMYK. We didn't use layers if we could help it. So yeah, I mean, it's just a throwback to working in RGB. And also I like being able to use layer effects, any sort of, glows, overlays, etc., that you just can't get in CMYK.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know there's going to be a color shift. I know that some of the colors I see on screen are not going to work. I I have palettes set up that are CMYK friendly. So I try to limit my color choices to those colors that I know relatively well will print. Sometimes I don't always get what I want because, say, for instance, I think Marvel has like 3 or 4 different printers that they use, and I don't necessarily have all of their calibrations. So I just do the best I can with the colors I can sort of trust,
Mhm.
and I hope for the best. Ultimately, for me, it's not so much the conversion as it is making sure that the balance of contrast of colors is strong enough so that if there is a color shift or there is a dulling of the print versus what I see on screen, the contrast is still there and still holds up. Even if it shifts 10 or 15 degrees one way or another, I'm still okay with the final product because it's still got, everything is still visible. And if it's not the absolute perfect same shade of teal that I had on screen, I can live with it if it's still sort of somewhere near teal in print, because the orange next to that teal makes that teal much brighter. It actually pops the teal better. So as long as I can balance out my color choices, in that sense, I'm okay with some shifting of colors. I don't want orange people, though. I will say that.
Unless they're supposed to be orange, they should not be orange.
Correct. The thing can be orange. Other people, not so much. Yeah.
So like there's just color cliches and tropes. Like when I think about South Florida, I always think of like aqua and salmon. Do you try and use those? Do you try and break those? I
Oh
mean,
no, I
what do you
love
do?
them. I embrace them. I take them on. I want the teal and the orange. Yeah, I mean, bring them on. I am fine with it. Like I love it. I don't care.
Yeah, I feel like there's a time and a place for both. There's a time and a place to break things. There's a time and a place to uh, lean into it. Like I feel like with a lot of traditional comics, leaning into it is actually, that's what you're supposed to do. Like it
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
like right.
Mhm.
Um, with our uh, with our comic with Kamikaze, like we really approached it again more from the animation side. So we were thinking, okay, what is our color palette and what is our story palette?
Right.
What does the cool colors represent? What does the warm colors represent? Where are these colors going to show up the most, and how do we use them not only like symbolically but within the story?
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
so like people who have certain jobs actually have a color. Another
Mhm.
kitty. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
Sydney. I have 4 of them. So this is
Oh,
Sydney. Anyway,
He's blepping.
he is blepping. He's missing part of his lower jaw, so he always bleps. Come on.
oh.
Anyway, sorry about
Uh,
that. Go on. I apologize.
they came to talk about colors, not cats.
He's like, I'm a black cat.
He is all the colors.
um,
It's
but yeah, so using it as a storytelling system, and it really just depends on what works. Honestly, like at the end of the day, if it works, who cares?
yeah, yeah. Do you just Carrie? Do you tend to? I realize that I have certain colors that I sort of fall back on a regular basis when I'm not really, when I'm just like, oh, I got to get this done. I tend to revolve around the greens a lot for some reason, and I don't know why I tend to do that. But it's like certain colorists I associate certain colors. Dave McCaig, for instance, I don't know why, and I tease him about this, but he's like the mustard yellow dude. He loves mustard yellow. Um, yeah, think about it. John Rauch, beautiful work. He is killing it on the stuff he's doing with Nick Bradshaw. And he loves magentas and purples. That is his default thing. Do you find yourself sort of defaulting to, damn it, Sydney? Do you find yourself like choosing a particular color, like, or gravitating toward a certain set of colors more often than not, or do you?
Yeah, I'm hardcore blues,
Okay, good. Yeah.
especially teal. Like teal is one of my favorite colors, especially aqua blue
Mhm.
and teal. And I love it when you kind of have not necessarily orange, but like a very, very warm goldenrod yellow
Mm,
color.
hmm.
So I love that play of like yellow and aqua turquoise
Yeah,
colors.
nice, nice.
That's sort of my thing.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
there's points where I'm working in the space that I'm working in, and it's sort of like, this isn't where this is supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah. I'm running into that now with this Neil Adams book because my in a scene that's a quiet scene and happening in somebody's living room, I'm like, okay, do I go with like do I look at modern interior design for my inspiration, or do I think more like like Jack Kirby did or whatever? Do I go unrealistic, or do I go realistic? Do I make the whole thing just bright yellow because that's sort of the feel? But yeah, it's kind of hard to. I realize that I do when I'm sort of lost on something, I default to like some sort of a green undercoloring, and then I look back and I'm like, why? Why am I always doing green? Green's so easy. Green's too easy. Green's too easy. Yeah, it really is.
There's been points where I've tried to break that, and I break it with patterns. So I
Oh, okay.
actually bring in patterns like, there was one page I was playing with at one point, which was, I think it was,
Mhm.
um, Joelle's work, um, and I was just playing with this page because, thankfully she's very sweet and sent me some so I could play with.
Nice.
And I noticed myself like, God, this looks so drab. Like, this isn't what I want it to be. It's sort of muddled together. And then I was like, wait a second. And I just like found this texture of plaid. And I was like, yeah, let's make the couch plaid. And
Wow. Okay, awesome.
it
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
was such a pain to get everything like right. But like once you got everything right, it was like, oh my gosh, that like it just popped and it looked, I hate that word, but
I
that's all I
know.
got. But it really stood out, and it made it look uh really homey. Like it looked like you walked into a cabin, and that was what I was trying to feel. Like I didn't want it to be like the drab old, creepy cabin. I wanted it to feel warm, and
Yeah.
that's what I
Mhm.
played
Yeah.
with.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's very cool.
Do you have any like time savers or just like shortcuts you use?
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. When the deadlines are tight, I revert to the essentials, because I'm like, okay, look, I got to get these pages done. It's nighttime blue. Yeah. When you could just as easily create a cool, magenta or red nighttime if the story calls for it. You could do some really amazing things with with greens, and I've seen them some amazing green night times that are just gorgeous. But yeah, when you're in a rush and you're like, I just okay, I really just got to get this done. These are easy fallbacks, and I need to get them done. So I don't like it, but sometimes that's what you got to do. So
Yeah, that's definitely, I agree. And the thing is that a lot of people talk about how some, they talk about tropes in art and cliches in art. And one of the things that I keep kind of coming back is oftentimes cliches are cliches for a reason. And it's because when you're looking at design and you're looking at art in general, what you're looking at is you're trying to communicate an idea as quickly as possible. And if you've already got a word, um, that encompasses what you're going to use. So metaphorically, the color being the word, like why change that unless you've got a really, really good idea that's going to make it even clearer.
mhm,
Um, so there's no reason to like a cliche is a trope that's been overused, but tropes are great shorthand
mhm,
for communicating these ideas. Like everybody knows of there's the shock, panel that has the jagged lines and then red behind it.
oh yeah,
Like
mhm,
everybody knows that and it works.
yeah,
I've seen people try to turn it into like blue and I'm like,
yeah.
that is
This
not
is
impactful.
exactly, you missed the point of that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah, fall back on them when you have to, because it's a universal language at that point.
exactly.
You're appealing to the widest possible understanding of that color and for that particular scene. So it happens.
Have you ever had an editor just say like no and send something back?
Every once in a while. And sometimes it was just a miscommunication where I missed a note along the way somewhere, or eh, like there was. I'm trying to think. It doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, it'll happen more on covers, I think, than on interior pages, because the covers have a specific job. They have to be able to catch the reader's eye. So I do take a lot more care in asking my artist, what do you have in mind for this? I want to see what you're thinking here. Um, uh, so every once in a while, I'll get a note back and be like, can we try, instead of this background being, orange, can we go with a purple instead? See what happens. Okay, but that's going to change everything else. So luckily, hey, Photoshop has layers, and I can do effects layers and tint everything, which makes it so much easier. But uh, there have been an occasion where I've had to switch gears entirely, and I try to turn in pages in such a way that I can get notes back early enough that I can gauge what is happening for the rest of the story. So if I do screw up, it's usually early on in the issue, and then I can sort of roll with that and try to avoid screw ups later on. So yeah, yeah.
How long does it take you to do a page?
Lately 2 weeks.
Wow. That's
uh,
good.
yeah. No. I would like to say that it would. I average about 3 to 4 hours on a page, depending entirely on the artist, and depending entirely on how intricate or simple the rendering is. If I'm You would be surprised that I find cell animated style rendering to be just as time consuming as actually doing full blown airbrushing and cuts, gradients, etc. Because the placement of the cell animation lines, the shadows and highlights and stuff are so specific and so important to define the shapes that it's a different thought process. So it takes me just as long to do an animated style book as it would something that's highly rendered.
Yeah.
But some pages take me, like I just finished a spread that took me 2 days, 3 days easily. And again, though, since I'm still sort of um, uh, in the feeling things out stage with like this FF book, it is taking me longer now, but I'll speed up as I go along. I always do. It always starts off real slow. I'll take 6, 8 hours on a page, and then I'll rev up near the end and do 3 or 4 or 5 pages in a day. So that's usually how it goes.
Yeah. For me, color usually takes me about 2 days.
Mhm.
So color and shade actually will take me about 2 days. And there's a really cool tool that I use. I hope they don't mind if I show it, but this is handy. Um, and it's a really cool tool that uses lights that you
Yes.
can move around. And
Nice.
so let's say you want to do like let's see if I can get it, like stuff like,
Yeah.
and then you can go back and kind of tilt it or move it around. This is the best $3 I ever spent.
What's
Because
that one called again?
called Handy.
Okay.
It's really, really simple. It has everything from you can buy different types of animal skulls. There's all sorts of anatomy. They have uh, like the planar flats and all that sort of
Mhm.
stuff. So you can really get an idea. And the coolest feature that I have on that is that you can take the lights and you can actually change the color of the
Nice.
lights and then move them around. So if you've got like, there's been points where one my artist, my background artist, my husband is like, okay, so we're in a dark alleyway, but there's like neon lights
Hmm.
and all the neon, there's like all the colors around, and I'm like, how like it's like when you've got like four separate points of lights, it's like how do you get that to work and just not make it look like it's flat
Yeah.
lighting?
Yeah.
um, so it using this application has been so helpful
That's awesome.
because just in the face alone, that's really difficult. And if I've found that if I have the face down and I know exactly how it works that way, I can push it on to the rest of the body. Because to me,
Mhm.
the like lighting the face is the hardest part.
Yeah, and the most critical because ultimately your reader is going to be looking at the face first, unless there's some other portion of the body is the important thing, like Kirby hands or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Ms. Marvel. I'm digging.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's funny because I have a one that I got years ago called Pose Tool, which is just a human figure that's like a rubber figure, and you can shape them and turn them into different poses, and then light those poses from different angles. And I use that for when I'm actually doing any drawing because I am not good at anatomy, and it's certainly helpful to just be able to say, "Hey, I need Spider-Man doing this," and then I can actually you know take this little digital malleable dude and put him in the pose that I want. But I like that one. I like the fact that that's got just the head. The one that I have is the whole body, always the whole body.
Mhm.
Nice.
What would you tell someone who wants to color for comics?
You go.
Color theory. Color theory, study color theory, study film, and also study life.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so, if you've got like one of my dog actually has this little blue toy, and I was so fascinated with it the other day because it was on a like brown floor, and but it was like the way that the light was cast from a window, it was actually like causing there to be like backlight,
The
like the
bounce
light,
light.
the blue
Yeah.
was actually bouncing off, and it was just like my husband was like, "Why are you staring at the dog toy?" He doesn't. Don't worry about it. I'm fine.
It's just a colorist thing. I do this all the time. Yeah. I would also suggest, I mean, if uh, and this is a little tougher now because so many people are coloring their own work. But if you, the aspiring colorist, wish to color other people's work,
Yes.
um, by all means, talk to artists online and ask for stuff to practice on. Ask for black and white pages to practice on. Everybody, there's tons of artists out there who have stuff that they'd love to try you out on. Or just let you practice on. Just make sure you're respectful of how and where you show your work. Make sure that you're not printing it up and using it as fan art or anything, because that's not cool. But yeah, definitely. And then when you do get sample pages from an artist, uh, by all means talk to that artist and learn the process of getting feedback, getting understanding how to take how to uh, roll with any criticism that that artist has, or many suggestions that the artist has, because again, all the collaboration is very, very important, and it's important to create those good relationships. And you never know, the person who sends you some sample pages may suddenly be on a high profile book and say, "Hey, I remember that colorist. I really dug their stuff when they tried out on my work. I would really much like Marvel to give that person a call." So you never know, it happens.
Thank you so much for joining me and giving me some time to talk about the awesome world of coloring for comics. You're both amazing, and I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it, you
Thanks
joining
for
us here
having
for
me.
MomoCon
It
Online.
was very nice to meet you too, Carrie.
Oh, nice to meet you too, Laura.
Take care.